After my billionaire grandfather Theodore left me his entire estate, my parents, who had ignored me all my life, tried to sue me for the money. They thought they were crushing a helpless tax accountant. They had no idea I am actually a top forensic auditor for the Department of Justice, and I had been building a federal case against them for years. When the judge saw me walk into his courtroom, he did not ask for my name. He asked why the plaintiff was suing a protected federal asset. But before I could destroy them in court, I had to survive the most humiliating day of my life. My name is Sienna, and at 34 years old, I have spent a decade hiding my true life from the people who should have loved me unconditionally. As a forensic accountant, I track down millions in stolen assets for the government, but to my family, I am just a disappointment who files tax returns. Last week, my grandfather died, and my family showed their true colors before his body was even cold. Before I tell you how they tried to erase me from my own family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated your worth. I stood at the entrance of the Old North Church in Boston, taking a deep breath. The air smelled of expensive lilies and old money. I straightened my black blazer and walked toward the front pew, the one reserved for immediate family. I just wanted to say goodbye to the only man who ever loved me. Suddenly, a manicured hand shot out and blocked my chest. It was Jasmine, my brother Preston's wife. She was wearing a black designer dress that cost more than my entire car. "Excuse me, Sienna," she whispered, but her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Where do you think you are going?" I looked at her confused. "To my seat, Jasmine, beside my parents and brother." Jasmine let out a short, cruel laugh that made my stomach turn. "Absolutely not. This row is for the press and legitimate business partners. Look at you. That suit is cheap polyester. It is offensive. You look like you are here to cater the event, not mourn. You are not going to ruin Preston's image on the day he is about to become CEO. Go sit in the very back row with the cleaning staff where you belong." My face burned with shame. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but then my mother Beatrice loomed over Jasmine's shoulder. I waited for a hug. I waited for her to tell Jasmine to step aside. Instead, Mom grabbed my wrist, her fake nails digging into my skin. "Sienna, where are the pearls? I specifically told you to wear the heirloom pearls for the press photos." I pulled my arm away, fighting back tears. "You sold those pearls 3 years ago, Mom. You sold them to pay for your neck lift. Do you not remember?" Mom's eyes widened in panic as she glanced around to see if anyone heard. "Shut up, you ungrateful little liar," she hissed. "You just lost them and are too ashamed to admit it. Just get out of my sight. You are ruining the family aesthetic." I looked past them to my father, Richard. He was standing 3 feet away, shaking hands with a banking executive. He saw everything. He saw his wife clawing his daughter. He saw his daughter-in-law blocking his child. Our eyes met. I pleaded silently for him to intervene. Dad just adjusted his silk tie, looked right through me like I was invisible, and turned his back to laugh at the banker's joke. My grandfather was not even in the ground yet, and they were already erasing me. I turned around and walked to the shadows in the back of the church. They thought I was walking away in defeat. They did not know I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. The reception was held at grandfather's estate in Beacon Hill. It did not feel like a wake. It felt like a corporate merger celebration. Waiters passed around vintage champagne while my family calculated their net worth. The air was thick with greed, not grief. I stood in the corner holding a glass of water, watching them circle the estate like vultures. They were already mentally redecorating the house and spending money they did not yet have. I found my brother Preston standing by the marble fireplace holding a glass of grandfather's oldest scotch. He was surrounded by his college friends and a few nervous-looking investors. Preston was 36 years old, but he still acted like a sophomore in a fraternity. "The old man had a good run," Preston announced loudly, spilling a bit of the amber liquid on the antique rug. "But let us be honest, shipping is a dinosaur industry. As soon as the papers are signed tomorrow, I am liquidating the entire fleet. We are pivoting the family capital into crypto and AI infrastructure. That is where the real billions are." My blood ran cold. Oceanic Logistics was not just a shipping company. It was grandfather's life work employing thousands of loyal workers. It was a stable, profitable empire that Preston was about to destroy for a gambling addiction he called investing. I stepped forward, breaking my rule of silence. "You cannot sell the fleet, Preston," I said, my voice steady but loud enough to cut through the chatter. "Those government maritime contracts are binding for another 5 years. Plus, the maritime assets are appreciating in this economy. If you liquidate now, you will trigger huge penalties and lose 40% of the valuation. It is financial suicide." The room went silent. Preston blinked at me, looking more annoyed than embarrassed. Jasmine stepped between us, laughing as she set down her wine glass. "Oh, look, everyone. The tax girl has an opinion. Sienna stick to filing tax returns for plumbers and school teachers, okay? This is high finance. Preston is a visionary. He does not need advice from someone who drives a 6-year-old Honda." I ignored her and looked to my father, hoping for reason. He was the interim CEO, after all. He knew the numbers. "Dad, tell him," I urged. "Oceanic is the backbone of this family. You cannot let him gut it for a trend." Richard looked at me with pure disdain. He walked over and placed a hand on Preston's shoulder, signaling his alliance. "Sienna, know your place." He snapped, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "You are a failure who settles for a salary that would not pay for my golf club membership. You have zero business acumen. Preston has shadowed me for years. He is the future of this dynasty. If he says we sell, then we sell. Do not embarrass us with your small-minded poverty mentality again. Now be quiet. The lawyers are here for the reading of the will." I bit my tongue, tasting blood. They called me a failure. They had no idea that the Department of Justice hired me specifically because I understand complex financial crimes better than anyone in the country. I watched them smirk, confident that they had won. They were about to walk into the lion's den, and they did not even know it. The conference room at the law firm was cold and sterile, much like the people sitting around the massive mahogany table. My mother, Beatrice, was already browsing real estate listings on her tablet, looking for a vacation home in the Hamptons. My father, Richard, sat at the head of the table, tapping his gold pen impatiently against the wood. He looked like a king waiting to be crowned. My brother Preston leaned back in his leather chair, kicking his feet up on the table with zero respect for the solemnity of the occasion. "This is just a formality, right?" Preston asked with a loud yawn, checking his watch. "We know the split. A third for me, a third for Mom, and a third for Dad. Just give us the access codes so we can get out of here. I have a crypto meeting at 4, and I need that liquidity hitting my account by noon." Jasmine sat next to him, whispering in his ear, likely telling him which yacht they should buy first. I sat alone at the far end of the table, clutching my purse. No one looked at me. To them, I was just a spectator to their victory lap. Mr. Thorne, the executor of my grandfather's estate, walked in. He was a man of few words who had served my grandfather for 40 years. He did not smile. He sat down and placed a single thin leather folder on the table. There was no stack of documents, just one sheet of paper. My father stopped tapping his pen. Mr. Thorne adjusted his glasses and looked at my family with eyes full of judgment. "I will now read the last will and testament of Theodore Vance," he announced. My parents straightened their posture, greedy smiles plastering their faces. Thorne began to read in a monotone voice. "To my son Richard, who never understood that wealth is a tool, not a toy. To my daughter-in-law, Beatrice, who values surface over substance. And to my grandson Preston, who has never earned a dollar he did not squander." My father frowned. "What is this, some kind of joke?" "Just read the numbers, Thorne." Thorne ignored him and continued reading. "I leave you each one item from my personal collection." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out 3 small black velvet boxes, sliding one to each of them. My mother tore hers open first, expecting a diamond or a key to a safe deposit box. Her face fell. She let out a gasp of horror. Inside the box was a dirty, tarnished copper coin. Preston opened his and stared at it in confusion. "What is this trash?" he muttered. Thorne read the final line of that section. "I leave you each one, antique Roman coin." It is the wage paid to a common laborer for one day of hard work. May it remind you of the value you have forgotten." The room exploded. Dad stood up so fast his heavy leather chair tipped over and crashed to the floor. "A coin!" he screamed, his face turning purple. "A single coin! The estate is worth $2.4 billion. Where is the rest of it? This is insanity." He was senile. "We will contest this. I am the eldest son. I deserve everything." Jasmine snatched the coin from Preston's hand and threw it across the room, where it hit the window with a pathetic clink. "This is illegal!" she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at the lawyer. "You manipulated him, didn't you, Thorne? Where is the money?" Thorne raised a hand, silencing them with a glare that could freeze water. "Sit down, Richard. I am not finished. There is the matter of the remaining assets, including the shipping fleet, the real estate portfolio, and the trust funds." The room went deathly quiet. Everyone turned to look at me, the only person who had not received a box. Mr. Thorne cleared his throat, and the sound echoed like a gavel in the silent room. He turned the page slowly, deliberately, letting the tension build until it was suffocating. "Regarding the remainder of my estate, including the controlling interest in Oceanic Logistics, the portfolio of commercial properties in Manhattan, and the family trust funds valued at $2.4 billion. He paused, looking directly at my father, whose face was already turning a dangerous shade of red. "I leave these assets in their entirety to the only member of this family who understands the value of an honest day's work, to the only one who visited me without asking for a loan, to my granddaughter, Sienna." For a split second, there was absolute silence. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room, leaving us all gasping. Then the bomb detonated. My father, Richard, let out a guttural roar like a wounded animal. He swept his arm across the mahogany table, sending the heavy crystal water pitcher flying. It smashed against the wall, shattering into 1,000 pieces that rained down like diamonds, but he did not even flinch. "You cannot do this!" he screamed at Thorne, his veins bulging in his neck. "That money is mine by birthright. She is a nobody. She is a glorified accountant who lives in a rental. She does not know how to run an empire. She will ruin everything in a week." My mother, Beatrice, stood up, her hands shaking so hard her diamond bracelets jingled violently. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You little witch," she shrieked. "You stole this. You poisoned his mind against us. How did you do it? Did you cry to him about how mean we were? Did you make up lies about your brother? You have always been jealous of Preston. This is your sick way of getting revenge, isn't it?" I sat there frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what had just happened. Grandfather left me everything. He saw me. All those years I thought I was invisible, he was watching. He knew exactly who they were, and he knew exactly who I was. But the most dangerous reaction came from Jasmine. She did not scream. She did not throw things. She was a shark sensing blood in the water. She immediately pulled out her phone and started recording, holding it steady with a terrifying calmness. "I need everyone to stay calm," she said, her voice dropping into her professional lawyer tone. "I am documenting this for the immediate injunction. Sienna, I want you to look at the camera. Admit it right now. You were the only one with access to his medication during those last few weeks. You were drugging him, weren't you? You kept him sedated so you could slide a new will under his nose while he was not in his right mind." "That is a lie," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, though my heart was pounding against my ribs. Grandfather was lucid until the very end. He knew exactly what he was signing. Jasmine smirked, panning the camera to my parents' distraught faces. "We have medical records, Sienna. We know about the heavy sedatives the doctor prescribed. We will prove you overdosed him to make him compliant. This is a clear case of undue influence and elder abuse. You will not see a dime of this money. You are going to prison for fraud." My father looked at Jasmine and then at me, his eyes cold and calculating. "That is right," he said, wiping spit from his mouth. "She manipulated a dying man. Call the police, Jasmine. We are pressing charges immediately." I looked at the three of them, united in their greed and hatred. They were not sad about losing a father or a grandfather. They were devastated about losing their payday. and they were ready to destroy me to get it back. The moment we stepped out of the heavy oak doors of the law firm, the war began. My parents and Preston were still in a state of shock, stumbling toward the elevator like zombie victims. But Jasmine was already in motion. She did not look devastated. She looked energized. She was tapping furiously on her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen as she dialed a number. "I need an emergency ex parte hearing immediately," she barked into the phone, ignoring the startled receptionist in the lobby. "Judge Reynolds owes me a favor from the gala last month." "Yes, the grounds are undue influence and potential elder abuse. We need a temporary restraining order on all estate assets. Now." I stood there clutching my purse, my heart sinking. I knew exactly what she was doing. Jasmine was a corporate shark. She knew she could not win on the facts, so she was going to win on procedure. She was going to bury me in paperwork until I suffocated. My phone buzzed in my hand. It was an automated notification from the estate trust portal. Alert: estate assets frozen pending litigation. Status locked. Just like that, the $2.4 billion was gone. I could not touch a cent. I could not even pay for a lawyer to defend myself. Jasmine hung up the phone and turned to me, a cruel smile playing on her lips. She walked over, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor, echoing like gunshots. She stopped inches from my face, invading my personal space. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" "Sienna?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper, so my parents would not hear the full extent of her venom. "Did you think you could just walk away with the family empire because the old man liked you better?" I looked her in the eye, trying to keep my voice steady. "It is what he wanted, Jasmine. It is legal. Legal does not matter." Jasmine laughed softly. "Money matters. Time matters. I just filed an emergency injunction. The assets are frozen. Do you know what that means? It means you cannot access the funds to hire a defense team. But we can. We will use our own money to drag this out for years. I will depose you for weeks. I will subpoena every text message you have ever sent. I will bleed you dry with legal fees." She leaned in closer, smelling of expensive perfume and malice. "You are a tax accountant, Sienna. You make 80 grand a year. My billable hourly rate is higher than your weekly paycheck. I will bankrupt you before you ever see a dime of that inheritance. You will be begging us to take a settlement just so you can afford rent." My father, Richard, walked up behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. He looked at me with cold, dead eyes. "You brought this on yourself, Sienna," he said. "You should have just accepted your place. Now we are going to take everything, even the little you have." I watched them walk out the revolving doors into the waiting limousine. They looked like a united front, a powerful fortress of wealth and influence. I stood alone in the lobby, holding a phone that told me I was technically a billionaire but practically penniless. They thought they had checkmated me. They thought I was just a broke accountant who would fold under pressure. They had no idea that freezing the assets was exactly what I expected them to do. It was the first step in my trap, and they had just walked right into it. I took a cab back to my apartment building in the Upper West Side. It was not a penthouse. It was a modest 2-bedroom unit in a building owned by Vance Real Estate, a subsidiary of my grandfather's company. I paid market rent every month because I never wanted to owe them anything. But as I stepped off the elevator onto the 4th floor, I realized that paying rent did not matter when your landlords were sharks. My hallway looked like a war zone. My clothes were scattered across the dirty carpet. My books were thrown in a pile like garbage. My kitchen appliances were smashed. Standing in the middle of the chaos was my brother Preston. He was leaning against my doorframe, watching a locksmith drill into my lock. He was whistling a cheerful tune as if he was not destroying my life. "What are you doing, Preston?" I asked, my voice echoing in the silent hallway. The neighbors were peeking out of their doors, but they were too afraid to say anything. Preston stopped whistling and looked at me with a smirk. "Oh, hey, Sienna. I did not think you would be back so soon. We are just doing some property management." He kicked a pile of my sweaters out of his way and walked toward me. "This building is reserved for high-value company employees," he said, crossing his arms. "Since you are just a low-level accountant and currently under investigation for fraud, We decided to terminate your lease. Effective immediately. I looked at the locksmith, who refused to meet my eyes. You cannot do this, I said. I have a lease. I have tenant rights. You have to give me 30 days' notice. Preston laughed, and it was a cold, ugly sound. Read the fine print, little sister. There is a morality clause in company housing contracts. Any tenant accused of criminal activity can be evicted instantly to protect the reputation of the firm. And since Jasmine just filed those court documents accusing you of elder abuse, well, you are officially a liability. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. You are homeless, Sienna. Maybe you can go sleep in that Honda of yours. Or better yet, go crawl back to the gutter where you belong. I did not scream. I did not give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I looked down at the pile of my belongings and saw something that made my heart stop. It was a silver picture frame. The glass was shattered. Inside was a photo of me and grandfather fishing in Cape Cod when I was 10. It was the only time I remembered feeling safe. Preston had stepped on it. The boot print was clearly visible on the smiling face of the only man who loved me. I knelt down slowly, ignoring Preston's laughter. I carefully brushed away the shards of glass, cutting my finger in the process. A single drop of blood fell onto the photo, but I did not care. I pulled the picture out and slid it into my pocket. I stood up and looked Preston dead in the eye. Enjoy the apartment, Preston, I said quietly. Make sure you keep the heat on. He frowned, confused by my lack of reaction. Get lost, he spat. I grabbed 2 suitcases that had not been opened yet and turned my back on him. As I walked to the elevator, I heard the door slam shut and the lock click. He thought he had taken my home. He did not realize he had just severed the last tie keeping me from destroying him. I was not homeless. I was unleashed. I dragged my 2 heavy suitcases 6 blocks to the nearest First National Bank branch. My arms were aching, and the wheels of my luggage rattled loudly against the pavement, drawing stares from pedestrians. I did not care. I just needed cash. I had exactly $12,000 in my personal savings account. It was money I had saved penny by penny from my government salary. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to get a motel room and food for a few weeks while I prepared my counterattack. I walked up to the teller, a kind woman named Martha, who had known me for years. I tried to smile, but my face felt stiff. I inserted my debit card and asked to withdraw $5,000. Martha typed on her keyboard and then frowned. She typed again, harder this time. Then she looked up at me with genuine panic in her eyes. I am so sorry, Sienna, she whispered. The system says your accounts are locked. All of them. Even your checking. My stomach dropped. There must be a mistake, Martha. The court order was supposed to freeze the inheritance assets, not my personal money. This is my salary. It has nothing to do with the estate. Martha turned her screen so I could see it. It was flashing red. The code read, Prejudgment Attachment, Plaintiff Vance Estate. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Jasmine. I walked out to the sidewalk, my hands shaking with rage, and called her. She picked up on the first ring. I could hear the sound of a cork popping in the background. She was celebrating. You cannot do this, Jasmine, I said, trying to keep my voice from cracking. You froze my payroll account. That is illegal. I need to eat. Oh, relax, Sienna, Jasmine purred. It is perfectly legal. Do you remember when you were a sophomore in college? You borrowed $5,000 from your parents for tuition because your scholarship did not cover everything. You signed a promissory note. I paid that back 10 years ago, I shouted, gripping the phone tight. I paid every cent. Jasmine laughed softly. Actually, you paid the principal. But the note had a clause about accrued interest compounded annually if not formally discharged in writing. You technically still owe the estate about $50,000, so I filed a motion to secure assets to ensure the estate is reimbursed. We cannot have a debtor fleeing with family money now, can we? You know that is a lie, I said. You are twisting the law to starve me out. Jasmine sighed, as if she was bored explaining calculus to a toddler. Listen to me carefully, Sienna. The law is a rich man's game. It is not about who is right. It is about who can afford to keep the clock running. You are just a little accountant with a frozen bank account and no home. You are not equipped to play at this table. Do yourself a favor. Apologize to your brother, sign the settlement papers, and maybe we will let you keep enough cash for a bus ticket out of town. She hung up before I could answer. I stood on the corner of 5th and Main with $0 to my name. People walked past me busy with their lives. I was destitute. Or at least that is what it looked like. Jasmine thought she had cut off my supply line. She did not know that by freezing my personal assets fraudulently, she had just committed wire fraud across state lines. She had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed to authorize a full federal investigation. I put my phone in my pocket, picked up my suitcases, and started walking toward the subway. I did not need money. I needed to get to the federal field office. I sat in a cheap 24-hour diner, nursing a cup of black coffee, because it was the only place with free Wi-Fi. I opened my laptop and the screen exploded with my face. But it was not a flattering professional photo. It was a grainy, zoomed-in shot of me leaving the funeral looking angry. The headline screamed, "Granddaughter from Hell," inside the twisted world of the Vance family heiress. I clicked on the live stream of the country's most popular morning talk show. There sat my mother, Beatrice. She was wearing a modest pastel cardigan instead of her usual designer furs. She held a tissue to her nose, dabbing at eyes that were perfectly dry. The host leaned in with a sympathetic expression. "Tell us, Beatrice, how did this happen? How did one person gain so much control over your father?" Beatrice sniffled loudly. "It was a slow process. Sienna was always jealous of the rest of us. She knew my father was vulnerable. He was 92. His mind was slipping. We tried to visit him. God knows we tried every single day. But she changed the codes to the gates. She fired the staff we hired and replaced them with her own people. She told him lies that we did not care about him. She isolated him completely." I slammed the laptop shut, but the audio kept playing. I heard the host gasp. "So you are saying she held him prisoner in his own home?" Beatrice sobbed. "Yes, that is exactly what she did. And now she has taken everything he built. We do not care about the money. We just want justice for my father. We want to know what she did to him in those final months." I looked around the diner. A group of teenagers in the booth next to me were watching the same clip on their phone. One of them pointed at the screen. "That is sick. Imagine doing that to your own grandpa. I bet she killed him." My phone started buzzing again. Not texts this time. Notifications. Thousands of them. My social media was being flooded. "Die, you greedy witch. I hope you rot in prison. Give the money back to his family." The internet mob had arrived, and they were hungry for blood. Jasmine's PR machine was working overtime. They had turned a complex legal dispute into a simple story of good versus evil, and I was the villain. They painted themselves as the heartbroken family fighting for the legacy of a beloved patriarch, while I was the cold, calculated monster who manipulated a dying man. I took a sip of my cold coffee. It tasted like ash. They were winning the court of public opinion. If this went to a jury trial now, I would be convicted before I even stepped into the courtroom. Beatrice's performance was Oscar-worthy. She had everyone fooled. But she made one critical mistake. She claimed I isolated him. She claimed no one else saw him. She forgot that my grandfather was paranoid about security. He had cameras installed in every room of that house, and those cameras recorded every single time Beatrice came to visit, or rather, the lack thereof. She had just gone on national television and lied about her visitation history, and I had the hard drive that proved she had not set foot in his house for 2 years. Let the world hate me for now. The truth was going to hurt them much more than a few mean comments. The next morning, I put on my best suit and walked into Miller & Associates, the mid-sized accounting firm that had served as my professional cover for 5 years. To my family, I was just a junior tax associate here. In reality, the firm was a front for a specialized DOJ task force investigating white-collar crime. But today, I had to play the part of the disgraced employee perfectly. The moment I stepped off the elevator, the office went silent. Phones stopped ringing. Conversations died mid-sentence. 20 heads turned to look at me. I could feel their eyes burning into my skin. On the wall, the break room TV was playing a rerun of my mother's interview. Mr. Davis, my supervisor, stormed out of his corner office. He was a large man with a booming voice, and today he was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance. "Sienna, pack your things," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "I want you out of this building in 10 minutes. I widened my eyes, feigning shock. "Mr. Davis, please let me explain. The news is lying. I do not want to hear it," he bellowed, marching across the bullpen until he was inches from my face. "We handle sensitive financial data for high-profile clients. We cannot have a suspected elder abuser and fraudster on our payroll. Our phones have been ringing off the hook all morning. You are a liability. You are fired effective immediately." "Please." I stammered, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing. "I have nowhere else to go. My accounts are frozen. I need this job." "That is not my problem," Davis spat. "Security, escort her out." 2 uniformed guards stepped forward, grabbing my arms. I let them drag me toward the elevators, my head hung low in shame. My coworkers watched with a mix of pity and disgust. I saw the receptionist shake her head and whisper, "I always knew there was something off about her." The guards shoved me into the elevator. Mr. Davis stepped in with us, blocking the view from the office. He hit the button for the lobby. The heavy metal doors slid shut, sealing us inside. Instantly, the tension in the air vanished. Mr. Davis straightened his tie and let out a long breath. He turned to me, and the anger in his eyes was replaced by a look of grim satisfaction. "That was convincing," he said, his voice dropping to a low, professional hum. "I almost believed you myself." I straightened my jacket, brushing off the invisible dust. "Did you get the data?" I asked. Davis reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black encrypted USB drive. He pressed it into my hand. "The forensic team finished decoding the ghost servers this morning. It is all here, Sienna. The offshore accounts your father set up, the shell companies your brother used to launder the shipping profits, and the wire transfers authorized by your sister-in-law. It is enough to put them away for 20 years. He looked at the floor indicator numbers, counting down. "The Bureau has officially opened the case file, but we need you to trigger the trap in open court to bypass their lawyers. Keep up the act. Let them think they have won. When they get comfortable, they will make a mistake." The elevator chimed at the lobby level. Davis stepped back, his face hardening into a mask of disdain again. He pointed at the door. "Get out, Sienna, and do not come back until you clear your name." I stepped out into the busy lobby, clutching the USB drive in my pocket. To the world, I was a fired, disgraced accountant with no future. But as I walked out the revolving doors, I felt lighter than air. I had the smoking gun. Now I just needed to wait for them to pull the trigger. I sat on a chipped green bench in the corner of Central Park, nursing a $5 foot-long sandwich that I had bought with the loose change from my purse. It was my first meal in 24 hours. I watched pigeons fight over a crust of bread and realized I was not much different from them right now. Technically, I was a billionaire heiress, but practically, I was a homeless woman eating lunch in a park. Suddenly, the peaceful sound of the wind in the trees was shattered by the aggressive roar of an engine. A bright red Ferrari mounted the curb illegally and parked right on the grass a few feet away from my bench. Pedestrians scattered, screaming in annoyance. The driver door opened like a wing and my brother Preston stepped out. He was wearing a bespoke Italian suit and sunglasses that cost more than my college tuition. He looked like a model for a lifestyle magazine. I looked like a disaster. Preston took off his sunglasses and scanned the park until his eyes landed on me. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. He walked over, avoiding the dirt patches with his Gucci loafers. He stopped right in front of me, blocking the sun. "Well, look at this," he laughed, shaking his head. "The mighty Sienna dining al fresco. Is that tuna? It smells like cat food." I took another bite of my sandwich, ignoring him. "Go away, Preston. I am not in the mood." Preston chuckled and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He crumpled it into a ball and flicked it at me. It bounced off my forehead and landed in my lap. "Go buy yourself a steak, Sienna," he said, his voice dripping with mock pity. "I hate seeing family starve. It looks bad for the brand." I picked up the bill and smoothed it out slowly. I did not throw it back. I needed it. Preston took this as a sign of submission. He sat down on the other end of the bench, placing a silk handkerchief down first so his pants would not touch the wood. "Listen, Sienna, I am here to offer you a lifeline," he said casually, checking his manicure. "Mom and Dad want to destroy you. Jasmine wants to put you in jail. But me, I am a benevolent brother. I have a proposition." I looked at him. "What do you want, Preston?" "Sign the waiver," he said. "Renounce your claim to the estate. Tell the judge you were mentally unstable and made up the lies about Grandpa. If you do that, I will give you a job." "A job?" I repeated. "Yes. The head housekeeper at the estate just quit. You know the house better than anyone. You know how Mom likes her sheets folded. You know how to polish the silver. It pays minimum wage plus room and board. You can live in the servants' quarters. It is a step up from a park bench right." My blood boiled. He wanted to turn the heiress into the maid. He wanted to humiliate me every single day for the rest of my life. I looked at his smug face. I thought about the USB drive in my pocket, the evidence that would send him to federal prison for a decade. I stood up, brushing the crumbs from my lap. "No thank you, Preston," I said calmly. "I prefer the fresh air out here." Preston's smile vanished. He stood up, looming over me. "Do not be stupid, Sienna. This is your last chance. Once Jasmine is done with you in court, you will be begging to scrub our toilets." I walked away without looking back. "Keep the job open, Preston," I called out over my shoulder. "You might need the practice cleaning toilets where you are going." He laughed, thinking I was joking. He revved his engine and sped off, leaving me in a cloud of exhaust fumes. He had no idea that I was not walking away. I was walking toward the FBI field office. 2 days later, I was sitting on the edge of a lumpy mattress in a cheap motel in Queens. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. I was going over my notes when there was a sharp knock at the door. It was a process server. He shoved a thick manila envelope into my hands and walked away without a word. I tore open the seal. It was a motion for summary judgment filed by Jasmine. I scanned the legal jargon, expecting the usual arguments about mental capacity. But when I turned to Exhibit A, my breath caught in my throat. It was a sworn affidavit, and the name at the bottom broke my heart. Carla Mendez. Carla was my grandfather's night nurse. She was a single mother of 2 who I had personally hired. I had spent hours talking to her in the kitchen, sharing coffee while grandfather slept. I had helped her with her kids' school applications. I trusted her. I read the document and my hands started to shake. The text was a work of fiction. "I, Carla Mendez, hereby testify under penalty of perjury that on the evening of November 12th, I witnessed Sienna Vance administer an unprescribed sedative to Mr. Vance. 20 minutes later, while the patient was in a state of confusion, Ms. Vance presented legal documents for him to sign." I dropped the paper. It was a lie, a complete malicious lie. On November 12th, I was not even at the house. I was in D.C. briefing a federal prosecutor on a separate case. But Carla had signed it. Her signature was notarized. I could picture exactly how it happened. Jasmine must have cornered Carla. She probably offered to pay off her mortgage or cover her children's college tuition. Jasmine knew everyone had a price, and she had found Carla's. This was the kill shot. With a medical professional testifying that I drugged the testator, the judge would have no choice but to invalidate the will. I would not just lose the money. I would face criminal charges for elder abuse and fraud. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jasmine. "We have the nurse Sienna. Withdraw your claim by 5 p.m., or we send this affidavit to the district attorney. You will look great in an orange jumpsuit." I walked to the dirty window and looked out at the rainy street. They had checkmated me. Or so they thought. They believed that because I was poor, I was powerless. They believed that a piece of paper could erase the truth. But Jasmine had made a fatal error. By suborning perjury, she had crossed the line from civil dispute to criminal conspiracy. I picked up the affidavit again. I looked closely at the timestamp on the notary seal. It was signed yesterday at 2 p.m. At that exact time, Carla was supposed to be on shift at the hospital where she worked part-time. If she was signing legal papers in Jasmine's office, she was falsifying her time card at the hospital. And if she lied about her hours, she was vulnerable. I did not call a lawyer. I opened my laptop and logged into the federal database using my secure credentials. I needed to look into Carla's financial history. If there was a sudden deposit of cash from a Vance shell company, I would have the link I needed. Jasmine thought she had bought a witness. In reality, she had just led me directly to the money trail. They wanted to play dirty. Fine. I was about to show them what happens when you bring a fake knife to a real gunfight. I was deep in the financial records when my phone alerted me. I had hacked into the estate security cameras days ago. What I saw on the screen made my blood run cold. My mother Beatrice was standing in the driveway wearing a face mask and pointing at Barnaby, my grandfather's 12-year-old golden retriever. Barnaby was the only living thing grandfather loved as much as me. He was old, arthritic, and half blind. A rough-looking man in a dirty pickup truck was dragging him by the collar while my father counted a small stack of cash. I did not think. I jumped into my beat-up Honda and drove like a maniac to the estate. I crashed through the service gate, not caring about the damage to my bumper. I screeched to a halt just as the man was lifting Barnaby into a rusted cage in the back of his truck. I jumped out screaming, "Get your hands off him!" My mother recoiled, clutching her pearls as if I was a disease. "Oh great, the squatter is back. Richard, get rid of her." I ran to the truck and grabbed Barnaby's leash. The poor dog was shaking, whimpering in terror. I looked at the man in the truck. He looked like a nightmare. "Where are you taking him?" I demanded. The man spat on the ground. "Rendering plant lady. Or maybe bait for the fights downtown. Depending on if he has any fight left in him. Your dad sold him to me for $50. Said he stank up the rug. I felt like I was going to throw up. I turned to my father. "You sold him for $50. He is family. He sat by Grandpa's bed every single day for 10 years. He is the only loyal thing in this entire house." Richard stepped forward, his face twisted in annoyance. "He is a rug-stained Sienna. He smells like urine and old age. He is depressing to look at. We are redecorating for the gala next week, and I am not having a dying mongrel ruin the feng shui." I unhooked Barnaby from the man's rope and pulled him toward me. "You are a monster," I spat. "I am taking him." "No, you are not," Richard roared. "That dog is estate property. You are stealing assets." He lunged for the leash. I blocked him with my body, protecting the dog. He raised his hand, and before I could flinch, he slapped me across the face. It was hard enough to split my lip. The taste of copper filled my mouth instantly. Barnaby barked a weak, raspy bark trying to protect me, but he could barely stand. Thunder rumbled overhead, and the sky opened up, soaking us instantly in freezing rain. I touched my bleeding lip and looked at my father. I saw no regret in his eyes, only rage that I was defying him. "Take the damn dog," he sneered, wiping his hand on his pants as if I was the one who was dirty. "But know this, Sienna. That is the last thing you will ever get from this family. If I see you on this property again, I will shoot you for trespassing." I did not say a word. I lifted Barnaby's heavy, shivering body into the back seat of my car. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the sheer realization of how evil they truly were. They would sell a loyal soul for $50 just to save on cleaning bills. I drove away into the storm, Barnaby's wet head resting on my shoulder. They had hurt me. They had stolen my money. But now they had attacked the innocent. And for that, there would be no mercy. While I was driving Barnaby to a secret vet clinic in Jersey, my father was fighting a battle of his own. But his battle was not noble. It was the consequence of a decade of greed. Richard sat in his dimly lit study staring at a burner phone that had been buzzing incessantly on his mahogany desk. He knew who it was. He had been dodging this call for 3 days. Finally, knowing he had no choice, he picked it up. His hands were shaking so violently that he spilled his 20-year-old scotch onto the leather blotter. "Mr. Vance," a voice said from the other end. It was calm, low, and terrifyingly polite. "You are late." Richard swallowed hard, loosening his silk tie that suddenly felt like a noose. I know. I know. There has been a complication. The probate court frozen the assets. My daughter is contesting the will. I just need a little more time. The voice on the other end chuckled dark and dry. We are not a bank, Mr. Vance. We do not offer extensions. You owe the syndicate $10 million. You said you would pay in full when the old man died. Well, he is dead. Where is our money? It is coming. Richard pleaded, sweat dripping down his forehead. I am the executor. I just need to get the girl to sign a waiver. Give me 2 weeks. You have 48 hours, the voice said. After that, we stop asking for money and we start taking payment in other ways. I believe your wife Beatrice just got a very expensive new nose. It would be a shame if something happened to it. Or maybe we pay a visit to that son of yours. 48 hours, Richard. Or we start sending you pieces of your family. The line went dead. Richard stared at the wall, his heart pounding like a sledgehammer. He was trapped. He had gambled away his own fortune and leveraged the inheritance he did not even have yet. Now the sharks were circling. He could not wait for the legal system. He needed a shortcut. He grabbed his secure landline and dialed Jasmine. She answered on the first ring, sounding annoyed. Richard, I am in the middle of drafting the subpoena for her bank records. Stop writing. Richard barked, his voice cracking with desperation. The legal route is too slow. We do not have months, Jasmine. We have days. What are you talking about? Jasmine asked. We are winning. The nurse's testimony is a slam dunk. It is not enough, Richard shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. I need her to sign that waiver tonight. I do not care how you do it, Richard. Are you suggesting what I think you are suggesting? Jasmine asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. I am saying that accidents happen. Richard hissed, his eyes wide with madness. People get mugged in this city every day. People get scared. If she is in the hospital, she cannot fight us. If she is terrified, she will sign anything. Do whatever you have to do, Jasmine. Break her spirit. Break her legs. I do not care. Just get that signature before I lose everything. He slammed the phone down. He poured himself another drink, but he could not get the glass to his lips. He had just put a hit out on his own daughter. And the terrifying part was, he did not feel guilty. He only felt relieved. I waited until 3 a.m. when the house was dark and silent. I parked my car a mile away and hiked through the woods to the back of the estate. I knew the service entrance code because I was the one who set it up for the staff. My fingers trembled as I punched in the numbers. 1945. The year grandfather started his company. The light turned green, and the heavy door clicked open. I slipped inside, moving like a ghost through the hallways I had grown up in. The house felt different. It felt cold and abandoned, even though my family was sleeping upstairs. I made my way to grandfather's study on the ground floor. This was the room where he taught me everything about business. Now it was filled with cardboard boxes. My parents were already packing up his legacy to sell it off piece by piece. I walked over to his massive oak desk. I knew exactly what I was looking for. Grandfather did not trust computers. He wrote everything down in a leather-bound journal that he kept hidden in a secret compartment inside the desk. I reached under the drawer, feeling for the latch. Suddenly, the hallway floorboards creaked. Heavy footsteps were coming toward the door. I froze. There was nowhere to hide except the narrow space behind the heavy velvet curtains. I dove behind them just as the door handle turned. The lights flicked on. Through the crack in the fabric, I saw my brother Preston stumble in. He was wearing his silk pajamas and holding a glass of water. He looked around the room with a sneer. He walked over to the desk, the very desk I was just searching, and ran his hand over the wood. Garbage, he muttered to himself. I bet I can get $5,000 for this antique junk. He sat down in grandfather's chair. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was terrified he would hear it. If he found me now, he would call the police and claim I was breaking and entering. It would ruin my defense. I held my breath until my lungs burned. Preston spun around in the chair for a moment, bored. Then his phone pinged. He looked at it, laughed, and stood up. Finally, he said to the empty room. He turned off the lights and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I waited a full 2 minutes before I dared to move. I scrambled out from behind the curtains and went back to the desk. I found the latch and clicked it. A small drawer popped open. Inside lay the worn black leather book. I opened it with shaking hands, turning to the last entry dated just 2 days before he died. The handwriting was strong and clear, not the scribble of a senile man. November 14th. My mind is clear, but my heart is heavy. I have made my decision. Richard and Beatrice only see me as a bank account. Preston is a lost cause. Sienna is the only one with the integrity to protect what I built. I have signed the new will today. I know they will fight her. I know they will try to destroy her, but she is stronger than she knows. This journal is my witness. I clutched the book to my chest, tears streaming down my face. This was it. This was the voice from the grave that would save me. I slipped the journal into my jacket and disappeared into the night. They had the lies, but I had the truth written in ink. I turned to leave the study, but the hallway light flicked on, blinding me. I froze. Standing at the foot of the stairs was my mother, Beatrice. She was wearing a silk dressing gown that cost more than my annual salary and holding a glass of red wine. She did not look scared to see an intruder. She looked annoyed, like she had found a rat in the pantry. "Well," she said, taking a slow sip of wine. "Look who it is. I should call the police. Breaking and entering is a felony, Sienna." I gripped the journal tight inside my jacket, hoping she would not see the bulge. I stood my ground. "I just came to get something that belongs to me, Mom. Not that you would understand sentimental value." Beatrice laughed, a dry, humorless sound that echoed off the marble floors. "Sentimental value. You are pathetic. You are 34 years old, sneaking around your parents' house like a thief in the night. Do you know why I really despise you, Sienna? It is not because you are poor. It is not even because you are plain. It is because you are so desperate for affection it makes me physically sick." I reached into my pocket and silently pressed the record button on my phone. I needed her to say it. I needed the jury to hear the monster hiding behind the pearls. "Why do you hate me, Mom?" I asked, keeping my voice low and trembling. "Is it because I am not Preston? Is it because I am not the son you wanted?" Beatrice walked closer until I could smell her expensive night cream and the alcohol on her breath. She looked at me with eyes that held zero motherly love. "Do not give yourself that much credit," she sneered. "It is business, Sienna. It has always been business. Do you think we had you because we wanted another child to love? Grow up." She swirled the wine in her glass, staring at the red liquid. "When your father and I got married, we were fighting for control of the board against your uncle. We needed 4 family votes to secure the majority share. We had Preston. We needed 1 more biological heir to lock down the trust voting rights. So we had you. You were a strategic acquisition, Sienna, a walking proxy vote, nothing more." My stomach churned, but I kept the phone steady. "So that is it," I whispered. "I was just a leverage play." Beatrice shrugged, seeing no issue with her logic. "We spent a fortune on your maintenance, private schools, tutors, tennis lessons. We expected you to yield a return on investment. You were supposed to marry a senator or a CEO, someone who could expand the alliance. Instead, you became a tax accountant and drove a Honda. You are a failed investment. You are a sunk cost. And now you are trying to steal the capital from the people who actually know how to use it." She finished her wine in one gulp and turned back to the stairs. "Get out of my house before I have the guards throw you out. You are not worth the paperwork of an arrest." She walked up the stairs without looking back. She thought she had crushed me. She thought she had stripped away my last shred of dignity. She did not know that she had just handed me the character evidence that would destroy her in family court. I felt the phone in my pocket warm against my leg. I had the journal. I had the recording. And for the first time in my life, I had the power. I walked out the front door into the cold night air. The tears stopped. A smile formed on my lips. The game was over. She just did not know it yet. I sat in my car parked 2 blocks away from Jasmine's luxury high-rise condo. The engine was off and the only light came from my laptop screen. It was time to test the intelligence of the family's legal mastermind. I attached a file containing 10 years of Richard's tax returns and the hidden ledgers showing his embezzlement. I routed it through a proxy server so it could not be traced back to me. The subject line was simple: "Read this before you go to court." I hit send. Inside the penthouse, Jasmine was pacing her living room. I had tapped into her smart home security hub days ago, so I watched her on my screen like it was a reality TV show. She heard her laptop ping. She walked over, setting down her glass of wine, and opened the email. I watched her face transform. At first, she looked bored. Then she leaned in closer, her eyes widening in disbelief. She was scrolling through the documents faster and faster. She was seeing the undeniable proof that her father-in-law was running a massive Ponzi scheme within his own company. She was seeing the wire transfers to illegal gambling syndicates. She was seeing the fraud. Jasmine stopped scrolling. She sat back in her expensive ergonomic chair and stared at the ceiling. I held my breath. This was the moment. She was an officer of the court. She knew that by representing Richard while knowing he was committing ongoing fraud, she was making herself a co-conspirator. If she had a shred of ethics, she would withdraw from the case immediately. She would call the authorities to save her own license. For a full minute, she did not move. Then she reached for her phone. I expected her to dial the State Bar, or maybe even the FBI. Instead, she opened the calculator app. She started typing numbers furiously. She was calculating the estate's value minus the stolen funds. She was estimating her cut if she divorced Preston after the inheritance cleared. A slow, terrifying smile spread across her face. It was the look of a predator who just realized the prey was injured. She did not want justice. She wanted the payout. She realized that if she turned Richard in now, the government would seize everything and she would walk away with nothing. But if she helped him win the lawsuit against me, she could secure the billions first. Then she could blackmail Richard later, or divorce Preston and take half the fortune before the FBI caught up. Jasmine closed the laptop and picked up her phone, dialing Richard. I listened through the hacked microphone. "Richard," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "I just got an anonymous email. Do not worry, I deleted it. But we need to accelerate the timeline. We cannot risk a long trial. We need Sienna to crack within 24 hours. I am going to file a motion to have her mentally evaluated. If we can declare her incompetent, we win by default." I closed my laptop and leaned back in my car seat. I felt a chill run down my spine. Jasmine had seen the crime and decided to become the getaway driver. She thought she was smart. She thought she was using the information to leverage her position. She did not realize that by deleting that email and making that call, she had just walked right into the federal trap I had set for her. She was no longer just a lawyer. She was now a target. The office of my court-appointed public defender smelled like stale coffee and defeat. Mr. Klein looked like he had not slept in a week. His desk was buried under mountains of case files for petty thefts and drug possessions. He clearly did not have the bandwidth for a billion-dollar estate litigation. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose before sliding a single sheet of paper across the scratched metal desk toward me. "Take the deal, Sienna," he said, his voice flat and exhausted. "It is the best you are going to get." I looked down at the document. It was a settlement offer drafted by Jasmine's firm. The terms were insulting. I would receive $50,000 in exchange for a full waiver of all claims to the estate. I would also have to sign a non-disclosure agreement forbidding me from ever speaking about the family or the business again. $50,000. That was less than what my mother spent on handbags last season. "This is a joke, Mr. Klein," I said, pushing the paper back. "The estate is valued at $2.4 billion. They are offering me crumbs to make me go away." Mr. Klein sighed, leaning back in his creaking chair. "Look at the facts, Sienna. They have a sworn affidavit from the night nurse stating you drugged your grandfather. They have the press painting you as a monster. They have a legal team that costs $5,000 an hour. I am a public defender with a caseload of 300 clients. I cannot win this for you. If we go to trial on Monday, they will destroy you. You could end up with nothing. Or worse, you could end up facing criminal charges based on that nurse's testimony. Take the 50 grand. Start over." I felt a cold anger rising in my chest. He was supposed to be my advocate, but he was already waving the white flag. He saw a losing battle. I saw a trap waiting to be sprung. But I could not tell him about the USB drive or the journal. If I revealed my hand now, Jasmine would find a way to suppress the evidence before we even entered the courtroom. I needed the element of surprise. I stood up slowly, smoothing out my skirt. I appreciate your advice, Mr. Klein, but I am not signing that paper, and I am not taking the settlement. Klein looked at me with pity. Then what is your plan, Sienna? You cannot beat them without a lawyer. I picked up my purse and looked him dead in the eye. You are right. I cannot beat them with a lawyer who does not believe in me. That is why I am firing you. Klein blinked, stunned. You are doing what? I am firing you, I repeated firmly. Please file the motion for withdrawal of counsel immediately. I will represent myself pro se. The lawyer let out a short, incredulous laugh. You are a tax accountant, Sienna. You are going up against Jasmine Vance and a team of Ivy League sharks. Do you know the saying? A man who represents himself has a fool for a client. They will eat you alive within the first 10 minutes. Let them try, I said. I walked out of his office, leaving the settlement offer on his desk. The hallway was dark and the fluorescent lights flickered overhead. I was now completely alone. No lawyer, no money, no home. My family thought I was a helpless victim walking to the slaughter. The public thought I was a villain. Even my own defender thought I was a fool. But as I stepped out into the blinding sunlight of the city street, I felt a strange sense of calm. They were expecting a scared amateur to show up on Monday. They were expecting to bully me into submission with procedural tricks and hearsay. They had no idea that they were about to face a federal forensic auditor who had spent her entire career dismantling crime syndicates far more dangerous than my mother's bridge club. I was not going to court to defend myself. I was going to court to hunt. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. The steps of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court looked less like a hall of justice and more like a gladiatorial arena. Barricades held back a sea of reporters and curious onlookers who had been fed a steady diet of lies by my family's PR team for weeks. I watched from the corner of the street as the Vance family arrived. It was a masterclass in manipulation. A convoy of 3 black SUVs pulled up to the curb. My father Richard stepped out first, wearing a somber charcoal suit that screamed humility. He walked around the car to open the door for my mother. Beatrice emerged wearing a vintage black mourning veil that I knew for a fact she had purchased yesterday, specifically for this performance. She looked frail, clutching a lace handkerchief to her dry eyes, leaning heavily on Preston for support. Preston looked stoic, the protective son shielding his grieving mother from the cruel world. The crowd erupted in supportive shouts. We love you, Beatrice. Justice for Theodore. Stay strong. Jasmine stepped up to the wall of microphones, her face set in a mask of righteous determination. We are here today, not for the money, she announced. Her voice projected perfectly for the news cameras. We are here to ensure that the final wishes of a great man are honored, and that those who took advantage of his vulnerability are held accountable. The crowd cheered. They ate it up. They saw a loving family fighting for their patriarch. They had no idea they were cheering for the very people who had robbed that patriarch blind for a decade. Then it was my turn. I had no motorcade. I had no bodyguards. I walked toward the steps alone, clutching a battered leather briefcase that contained my laptop and the journal. As soon as the crowd spotted me, the atmosphere shifted from sympathy to hostility. The cheering died, instantly replaced by a low, angry rumble. There she is! Someone screamed, the gold digger, monster. Another voice yelled. I kept my eyes forward, focusing on the heavy brass doors at the top of the stairs. I forced myself to walk with a steady rhythm. 1 step, 2 steps. Do not look at them. Do not react. Suddenly I felt a sharp impact on my left shoulder, followed by the wet sensation of slime soaking into my blazer. A rotten egg had exploded against my collar. The smell of sulfur mixed with the expensive perfume of the crowd. Shame on you, a woman in the front row shrieked, her face twisted in hate. How do you sleep at night? I stopped for a fraction of a second. My hand instinctively went to the mess on my shoulder. I saw my mother at the top of the stairs. She had paused to watch. For a brief moment, the act dropped. She smiled. It was a tiny, imperceptible smirk of triumph. She thought she had won. She thought the humiliation would break me before I even entered the building. I took a deep breath. I did not wipe the egg off. I left it there, a yellow badge of their cruelty. I lifted my chin and continued climbing the stairs. I walked past the screaming mob, past the flashing cameras, and past my family. I did not say a word. I did not need to. Inside that briefcase was a bomb that was going to blow their perfect little performance to pieces. I pushed open the heavy doors and stepped into the silence of the courthouse. The trial of the century was about to begin. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick enough to choke on. Jasmine Vance stood in the center of the room like she owned the building. She wore a pristine white suit that symbolized innocence, a stark contrast to her dark intentions. She did not use notes. She did not stutter. She walked back and forth in front of the jury box, making eye contact with every single juror. She was not just a lawyer, she was a storyteller, and she was weaving a masterpiece of fiction. Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Jasmine began, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. We are not here about money. We are here about a tragedy. Theodore Vance was a titan of industry. He built an empire with his bare hands, but in his final months he was frail, he was confused, and he was ruthlessly exploited by the one person he was supposed to trust. She spun around and pointed a manicured finger directly at me. Sienna Vance saw an opportunity. She saw a dying man with dementia, and she saw a payday. She isolated him from his loving family. She poisoned his mind against his own son. She capitalized on his vulnerability to steal a legacy she did not build and does not deserve. I sat alone at the defense table. The space next to me where a lawyer should have been was empty. I kept my face neutral, but my heart was hammering. The jury looked from Jasmine to me, and I could see the disgust in their eyes. They bought it. The prosecution calls Carla Mendez to the stand, Jasmine announced. The doors opened and Carla walked in. She looked nothing like the confident nurse I knew. She was wearing a modest gray dress and clutching a rosary. She sat in the witness box, wiping tears from her eyes before she even spoke a word. Ms. Mendez, Jasmine said softly, leaning against the railing. Please tell the court what you saw on the night of November 12th. Carla took a shaky breath. He did not want to sign it, she sobbed. Mr. Vance kept asking for his son, Richard. He kept saying he wanted to see his family. But Sienna refused to call them. She told him they abandoned him. And then what happened? Jasmine pressed. Carla looked down at her hands. She went to the kitchen and crushed some blue pills into his tea. She told him it was his heart medication. But I checked the bottle later. It was a heavy sedative. After he drank it, he became like a zombie. He could barely hold the pen. She put the pen in his hand and guided it across the paper. He was not conscious. He was a puppet. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. My mother, Beatrice, let out a loud wail and buried her face in Preston's shoulder. It was a perfect performance. The judge, a stern man with gray hair, looked at me over his glasses. His expression was one of pure contempt. He scribbled furiously on his notepad, nodding in agreement with the testimony. I watched Carla carefully. I saw her eyes dart briefly to Jasmine, seeking approval. Jasmine gave a microscopic nod. They had rehearsed this. They had the story. They had the witness. They had the emotion. To anyone watching, it looked like the case was already over. I was the villain and they were the victims. I sat perfectly still, letting them enjoy their moment. Because I knew that the higher they built this tower of lies, the harder it would fall when I pulled the foundation out. Just as Jasmine was preparing to call her next witness, the side door of the courtroom swung open. We were all expecting Judge Reynolds, the man Jasmine had bragged about having in her pocket. She had spent weeks charming him at fundraisers, ensuring he would look favorably on her motion. But the man who walked in was not Reynolds. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice shaking slightly. All rise. Judge Reynolds has been hospitalized with a sudden cardiac event. Presiding over this case will be the Honorable Justice Percival Henderson. A collective gasp went through the room. Even the reporters in the back row stopped typing. I saw Jasmine's face drain of all color. She grabbed my brother's arm so hard her knuckles turned white. I knew why. In the Boston legal circuit, Judge Henderson was not known for his mercy. He was known as the Hangman. He was a former federal prosecutor who despised white-collar crime and had zero patience for corporate theatrics. He was the one judge Jasmine could not bribe, charm, or intimidate. Henderson marched to the bench in a billowing black robe looking like a storm cloud. He did not smile. He did not look at the cameras. He sat down and slammed his gavel with a force that made my mother jump. "Be seated," he barked. "I have reviewed the preliminary motions in chambers. This is a circus. I will not tolerate a circus in my courtroom." Jasmine quickly composed herself. She smoothed her skirt and put on her best professional smile. "Your Honor, we apologize for the media presence. This is a high-profile case involving the tragic exploitation of a sit-down counsel," Henderson interrupted without even looking up. He was flipping through the thick case file, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He read the affidavit from the nurse. He read the motion to freeze assets. He read the accusations of elder abuse. Then he stopped. His hand froze in mid-air. He looked at the name on the cover of the file. Then he looked up at the plaintiff's table, examining my father and Jasmine with a look of pure confusion. Finally, he shifted his gaze to the defense table where I sat alone. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable silence. He took off his wire-rimmed reading glasses. He pulled a handkerchief from his robe and wiped the lenses slowly, never taking his eyes off me. He put the glasses back on and leaned forward over the bench, peering down at me as if he was trying to solve a complex puzzle. "Ms. Sienna, the judge," asked, his voice booming through the silent room. I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Henderson looked back at the file and then at me again. He looked genuinely baffled. "Wait a minute. Am I reading this docket correctly? The defendant is you. These people are suing you." Jasmine jumped up, sensing she was losing control of the narrative. "Yes, Your Honor. The defendant, Sienna Vance, manipulated my late father-in-law into—" "Quiet," Henderson roared, slamming his hand on the desk. He ignored Jasmine completely and kept his eyes locked on me. "Ms. Sienna, I was under the impression you were currently in Washington working on the Operation Blackbriar assignment for the Department of Justice. Why are you sitting at a defense table in my courtroom being accused of stealing pocket change from a shipping company?" The entire courtroom went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. My father's jaw dropped open. Jasmine looked like she had just been slapped. The reporters started whispering furiously. The judge knew me, and he just revealed that I was not a tax accountant. The first crack in the dam had just appeared. Jasmine Vance was not a woman who panicked easily. She was a woman who calculated risk. But in that moment, looking at Judge Henderson, she realized she was staring at a variable she had not accounted for. She stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her white suit. Her mind was racing. If the judge knew me, if he respected me, her entire narrative about the helpless elder abuser was in danger. She needed to kill this momentum immediately. She needed a mistrial. "Your Honor." Jasmine said, her voice sharp and authoritative, echoing off the high ceilings. "I must object. I move for an immediate recusal. If you have a prior personal or professional relationship with the defendant, this is a clear conflict of interest. You cannot preside over this case impartially." The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The reporters were typing furiously. Jasmine looked at the jury, making sure they understood her point. She was painting the picture of a rigged system where the defendant had friends in high places. Judge Henderson leaned back in his massive leather chair. He did not look intimidated. He looked amused. He folded his hands over the case file and peered down at Jasmine over his spectacles. "A conflict of interest," he repeated slowly. "You think I am biased, Ms. Vance?" "I think the law is clear," Jasmine retorted, gaining confidence. "You just admitted you know her. You admitted knowing her employment history, which contradicts the public record. This suggests a level of familiarity that prejudices my client's right to a fair trial." My parents nodded vigorously in the front row. Richard whispered to Beatrice loud enough for the nearest jurors to hear. "See, she's sleeping with the judge. That is how she gets away with it." Henderson laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that stopped the whispers instantly. "Let me clarify something for the record, counsel. I do not know Ms. Sienna socially. We do not attend the same galas. We do not share meals. I know her name because I have read it at the bottom of 15 separate sealed federal indictments in the last 3 years. The room exploded. The noise was deafening. My mother gasped, clutching her chest theatrically. "See," Beatrice screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "I told you she was a criminal. She is being indicted. She is in trouble with the feds." The jury looked at me with renewed horror. They misunderstood the legal terminology. They thought the judge meant I was the one being charged in those indictments. They thought I was a serial fraudster who was finally getting caught. Jasmine's face lit up with triumph. She thought the judge had just handed her the victory on a silver platter. "So she is a criminal," Jasmine announced, turning to the jury with a smug smile. "Thank you, Your Honor, for establishing the defendant's character. If she is under federal indictment, she has no credibility here." Henderson picked up his gavel and slammed it down so hard the wood cracked. "Silence," he roared. The room froze. He looked at Jasmine with eyes full of pity. "You misunderstand, counsel. Ms. Sienna is not the target of those indictments. She is the author. She is the lead forensic auditor for the Department of Justice's Special Crimes Unit. She does not commit crimes, Ms. Vance. She hunts the people who do. And from what I see in this file, she has been hunting you for a very long time." Jasmine's smile vanished instantly. Her skin turned the color of ash. She looked from the judge to me, realizing for the first time that she was not the hunter. She was the prey. Judge Henderson leaned back in his chair and gestured toward the witness stand. "The floor is yours, Ms. Sienna. Call your first witness." I stood up slowly. I did not pick up a notepad. I did not touch the pile of legal documents on the table. I did not need them. I had spent the last 2 years memorizing every single number in the company ledger. I looked across the room at the man who had raised me, the man who had slapped me in the rain, and the man who had just tried to frame me. "I call Richard Vance to the stand," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the silent room. My father stood up. He buttoned his charcoal suit jacket, trying to regain his composure. He shot a nervous glance at Jasmine, but she was too busy staring at the judge to reassure him. Richard walked to the witness box with his chin high, trying to maintain the facade of the grieving son. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. It was the first lie he told that day. I walked to the center of the room. I stood just a few feet away from him. I wanted him to see my eyes. I wanted him to see that the daughter he called a failure was about to end his career. "Mr. Vance," I began, keeping my tone conversational. "You testified earlier that my grandfather Theodore was suffering from severe dementia for the last 2 years. You claimed he was incapable of making rational decisions. Is that correct?" Richard cleared his throat, adjusting his silk tie. "Absolutely. It was heartbreaking. He did not know what day it was. He could not handle basic tasks. He certainly could not understand complex financial documents." I nodded slowly. "So because he was incapacitated, you took over the financial management of Oceanic Logistics. You were the one authorizing payments, signing contracts, and managing the accounts." Richard sat up straighter, puffing out his chest. "Yes, I had to step in. I carried the weight of the entire company on my shoulders to protect the family legacy. I made every executive decision during that period. So you take full responsibility for all financial activity within the company accounts from 2022 to the present?" I asked, locking eyes with him. "I do," Richard said, looking at the jury with a practiced smile. "I saved the company." I smiled. It was a cold, dangerous smile. "Then let us talk about how you saved it. Do you recall a specific wire transfer made on May 12, 2022? Richard blinked. The smile faltered slightly. He looked confused, trying to search his memory. May 12th. "I do not have the books in front of me, Sienna. We process thousands of transactions a year. I cannot be expected to remember every single vendor payment." "Let me refresh your memory then," I said, stepping closer. "It was a wire transfer for $3.2 million. It was sent to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Ventures. The authorization code used was your personal biometric override." The color drained from my father's face instantly. It was as if someone had punched him in the stomach. He gripped the wooden arms of the witness chair so hard his knuckles turned white. He knew that date. He knew that name. It was not a vendor. It was the shell company used by the underground casino in Macau, where he had lost a fortune in a single weekend. I do not recall that specific transfer. He stammered, his voice suddenly thin and shaky. It must have been for fuel costs. Or port fees. We have many international partners. Really? I asked, tilting my head. Because I traced the routing number, Dad. Blue Horizon Ventures is not a fuel supplier. It is a holding company registered to a gambling syndicate. Why was the family shipping company sending $3 million to a casino? Objection! Jasmine shrieked, jumping to her feet, knocking her chair over. This is irrelevant. We are here to discuss the will not corporate accounting. This is a fishing expedition. It is not a fishing expedition, I said, turning to the judge, my voice rising. It is the motive. Grandfather did not have dementia. He discovered this transfer. He found out his son was embezzling company funds to pay off gambling debts. That is why he cut you out of the will, and that is why you are desperate to destroy me, because you know I am the only one who can prove it. Richard looked at me with pure terror. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked like a ghost. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The jury was leaning forward, eyes wide. The first brick of their wall had just crumbled. Richard laughed nervously, looking at the jury with sweat dripping down his temple. You are imagining things, Sienna. You are making up wild conspiracy theories because you are bitter. You are just a failed accountant who is jealous of my success. You do not understand how global finance works. You do not have the clearance or the intelligence to understand these transactions. Go back to filing tax returns for waitresses and leave the business to the adults. I stared at him for a long moment, letting his insults hang in the air. He was digging his own grave with every word. I walked back to the defense table calmly. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a black leather wallet. It was not a prop. It was the object I had worked 10 years to earn. I walked back to the witness stand and slammed the wallet open on the wooden railing right in front of his face. The heavy metallic thud of the gold badge hitting the wood silenced the room. I am not a tax accountant, Dad, I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. I never was. I am a senior special agent and forensic auditor for the Department of Justice Financial Crimes Task Force. My badge number is 4922 Alpha, and for the last 24 months, I have been the lead investigator on Operation Ironclad. Richard looked down at the badge. His eyes bulged. He looked like he was having a stroke. Jasmine stood up at the plaintiff's table, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She finally realized why the judge knew my name. I turned to the jury, who were now sitting on the edge of their seats. The narrative of the poor senile old man ends today. Theodore Vance did not have dementia. He did not have Alzheimer's. He had a conscience. 2 years ago, he discovered that his son was using the company's shipping containers to smuggle contraband. He came to me. He asked for help. I looked back at my father. You thought he was losing his mind because he was forgetting names. He was not. He was acting. He was wearing a wire. Every time you came into his office to bully him into signing checks, he was recording you. Every time you bragged about your offshore accounts, he was sending the audio files directly to my encrypted server. He was not your victim, Richard. He was my confidential informant. My mother, Beatrice, let out a scream of denial from the front row. That is a lie. My father would never betray us. He loved us. He loved the law more, I shot back. He left me the company, not because I was his favorite, but because I am the only person with the federal security clearance to clean up the mess you made. He transferred the assets to me to prevent the government from seizing the entire company under the RICO Act. He was trying to save the jobs of 3,000 innocent employees from your greed. Richard was shaking his head violently. No, this is entrapment. You cannot do this. You are my daughter. I am an officer of the court first, Mr. Vance, I said, cold as ice. And you are not my father right now. You are suspect number 1. I picked up the badge and clipped it onto my belt. The disguise was gone. The victim was gone. The only thing left in the room was the law. Richard tried to regain his composure, wiping sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. This is absurd, he stammered. looking at the jury who were now whispering furiously. So what if I have a badge? That does not prove anything. My father was old, he was confused. He probably gave you some old notebooks filled with scribbles and you are trying to pass them off as evidence. You have nothing concrete, Sienna, just the ramblings of a dying man. I walked back to the defense table and picked up the heavy black leather book I had retrieved from the secret compartment in Grandfather's desk. I held it up for the entire room to see. It looked ancient and wore a stark contrast to the glossy digital binders Jasmine had submitted. You are right, Dad, I said calmly. Grandfather did keep notebooks, but this is not a diary. In the forensic accounting world, we call this a shadow ledger, or more poetically, the silent ledger. I walked to the evidence table and placed it down with a heavy thud. Then I pulled out a stack of documents from my briefcase. I turned to Judge Henderson. Your Honor, the plaintiffs submitted Exhibit C, which they claim are the complete financial records of Oceanic Logistics for the fiscal years 2022 through 2024. Those records show a healthy company with standard operating expenses. I pointed to the black book. But those are the white books, the ones prepared for the IRS and the shareholders. This book, however, contains the real numbers, the numbers that did not add up. I opened the book to a page marked with a red sticky note. I looked at Richard. You claim the $3.2 million was for fuel. But here in Grandfather's handwriting dated May 12th, he notes, wire transfer to Blue Horizon. Richard said it was for engine repairs. I called the repair shop. They never received an order. Followed the money. It went to a private account in the Cayman Islands held by a known syndicate leader. Richard gripped the railing. That is hearsay, he shouted. Is it? I asked, flipping the page. August 4th. $2 million withdrawn for port security fees. But the Port Authority has no record of payment. Grandfather tracked it. It went to Preston's crypto wallet, and from there it was funneled into a dark web marketplace used for illegal sports betting. I turned to the jury. Over the last 3 years, my father and brother drained over $30 million from the company. They did not just steal profit, they liquidated pension funds. They took money meant for worker safety equipment. They gutted the company from the inside out to fund their vices. Objection. Jasmine screamed, her voice cracking. This is unverified. You cannot prove who authorized these transactions. My clients are not accountants. They could have been victims of a clerical error. I turned to Jasmine slowly. I was waiting for that. I picked up a separate document from my pile. It was a notarized compliance form. You are right, Jasmine. They are not accountants. They needed someone smart to hide the money. Someone who knew how to set up blind trusts and shell companies to make the theft look like legitimate business losses. I held up the paper. This is the incorporation document for Blue Horizon Ventures. It requires a legal attestation. And right here at the bottom next to the seal is the signature of the attorney of record. I walked over to the plaintiff's table and slammed the paper down in front of her. It is your signature, Jasmine. You did not just represent them. You laundered the money for them. You are not the lawyer. You are the architect of the crime. Jasmine stared at the paper. Her hands started to shake uncontrollably. She looked up at the judge, and for the first time, the shark looked like she was about to drown. Jasmine stared at the document on the table. The signature was hers. The seal was hers. The crime was hers. For a moment, she looked like she might faint, but then her survival instinct kicked in. She was a lawyer, and she knew that even a smoking gun could be suppressed if the search was illegal. She straightened her spine and turned to Judge Henderson, her eyes wild with desperation. Your Honor, I move to strike this entire line of questioning, she shouted, her voice shrill and trembling. I move to suppress this so-called ledger and these digital records immediately. This evidence is the fruit of the poisonous tree. The defendant admitted to breaking into the estate to steal that journal. She admitted to hacking private servers to obtain these files. She did not have a warrant. She did not have probable cause. This is a violation of the Fourth Amendment and my client's right to privacy. You cannot allow stolen property to be used as evidence in a civil trial. The courtroom went quiet. It was a valid legal argument. If I had obtained the evidence illegally, it would be thrown out, and they would walk free. My father, Richard, let out a breath of relief, wiping the sweat from his upper lip. He thought Jasmine had found a loophole. He thought they were going to get away with it on a technicality. Judge Henderson looked at Jasmine over his spectacles. He did not look impressed. He looked bored. He reached into his own file, the one he had brought with him to the bench, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "You are mistaken," Counselor Henderson said, his voice calm and terrifying. "The Fourth Amendment protects citizens from unreasonable search and seizure by the government. It does not apply when the owner of the property voluntarily hands over the keys." Jasmine blinked, confused. "What are you talking about? The owner is dead." Henderson held up the paper. "This is a notarized affidavit signed by Theodore Vance, dated 2 years ago. In it, he explicitly appoints Sienna Vance as his personal auditor, with full unrestricted access to all corporate accounts, personal properties, and digital archives. He gave her the authority to investigate his own company." The judge leaned forward. "She did not steal that journal, Ms. Vance. She collected it. She did not hack those servers. She was the administrator. Every single piece of evidence she has presented today was obtained with the full written consent of the victim. It is not only admissible, it is damning." Jasmine froze. Her legal shield had just evaporated. She looked at Richard and Beatrice, who were staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. They realized that the old man they had mocked and ignored had outsmarted them from the grave. He had not just written a will, he had written an indictment. Henderson looked down at me. "Ms. Sienna, do you have anything else to add before I render my judgment?" I looked at Jasmine. She was no longer the arrogant shark who had blocked my way at the funeral. She was a cornered animal. "No, Your Honor," I said quietly. "The silent ledger speaks for itself." The judge nodded grimly. He turned to the bailiff. "Bailiff, lock the doors. No one leaves this courtroom." Panic erupted at the plaintiff's table. Richard tried to stand up, but his legs gave out and he collapsed back into his chair. Beatrice started hyperventilating, clutching her chest. Preston looked around frantically for an exit, but there was none. The civil trial was over. The criminal reckoning was about to begin. Judge Henderson laid his gavel down and crossed his arms. The silence in the courtroom was heavy and suffocating. I looked at my watch. It was exactly 10 o'clock. I turned toward the back of the room and gave a single sharp nod to the bailiff standing by the double doors. He stepped aside and unlocked the deadbolt. The heavy oak doors flew open with a crash that shook the walls. A dozen figures in tactical gear flooded the center aisle. They moved with the precision of a military strike unit. Their blue windbreakers bore 3 letters in bold yellow that made the blood drain from my father's face. FBI. Federal Agents. The lead officer shouted, his voice booming over the cries of the terrified spectators. "Nobody move! Stay in your seats!" The team split up. 4 agents marched directly to the plaintiff's table. My father, Richard Vance, stood up, his face turning a deep shade of purple. "This is an outrage," he bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at the approaching officers. "Do you know who I am? I am Richard Vance. I demand to speak to the commissioner." The lead agent did not slow down. He grabbed Richard's arm and spun him around, slamming his chest against the mahogany table. "Richard Vance, you are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering under the RICO Act," the agent recited mechanically. The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the room. The man who had controlled my life with an iron fist was now restrained like a common criminal. Next to him, Preston was trying to hide behind his mother. He looked like a frightened child. 2 agents grabbed him by the shoulders and hauled him out of his chair. He did not fight. He collapsed. "No, wait!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "I did not do it. It was Dad. It was Jasmine. I just signed the papers. Please!" They dragged him away from Beatrice. He looked back at her, tears streaming down his face, ruining his expensive tan. "Mom, help me!" he sobbed, kicking his legs as they marched him toward the exit. "Mom, do something. They are hurting me. Mom!" Beatrice sat frozen in her chair, her mouth open in silent horror. She reached out a hand toward her golden boy, but the agents blocked her view. For the first time in her life, her money and her influence were useless. She watched her son being dragged away in cuffs, and she could do absolutely nothing to stop it. I stood at the defense table watching the chaos. I did not smile. I did not cheer. I just felt a profound sense of relief. The untouchable Vance dynasty was crumbling right before my eyes. They had spent years building a fortress of lies and money. It took the FBI exactly 30 seconds to tear it down. While the agents wrangled my father and brother in the center aisle, causing a scene that would lead the evening news, one person was quietly trying to vanish. Jasmine Vance. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She did not scream. She did not reach out for her husband Preston as he was dragged away weeping. Instead, she calmly closed her laptop, slid it into her platinum Hermes briefcase, and stood up. She smoothed the front of her white suit, checking her reflection in the dark window of the courtroom. She turned on her heel and began walking briskly toward the side exit used by the court clerks. She was cutting her losses. She was leaving them behind to save herself. I moved faster. I vaulted over the low railing of the defense box and sprinted across the room. I stepped directly in front of the double doors, blocking her only escape route. Jasmine stopped inches from my face. She smelled of cold fear and expensive perfume. "Get out of my way, Sienna," she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "I am legal counsel. I have attorney-client privilege. I am walking out of here." I did not move. I crossed my arms and looked her up and down. "You really think that shield works when you are the one holding the smoking gun, Jasmine? You are a partner at a top-tier firm. You graduated summa cum laude from Harvard. You know the law better than anyone in this room. So tell me, what is the federal sentencing guideline for Title 18, Section 1001? Falsifying medical records to defraud the government." Jasmine's eye twitched. "I did not falsify anything," the nurse testified. "And the money laundering," I interrupted, stepping closer. "You signed the incorporation papers for the shell company in the Caymans. That is not legal representation, Jasmine. That is facilitation of a criminal enterprise. That is a Class B felony." Jasmine gripped the handle of her briefcase so tight her knuckles turned white. "I was just doing my job," she spat. "I can cut a deal. I can testify against Richard. I have the files." I shook my head slowly. "It is too late for a deal, Jasmine. You are not a witness. You are the architect." Two female FBI agents appeared behind her. Jasmine spun around, her composure finally cracking. "Do not touch me," she shrieked, backing away. "I am an officer of the court. You cannot arrest me without a warrant." One of the agents, a tall woman with a grim expression, pulled a folded document from her vest. "We have a warrant, Ms. Vance, issued by the federal magistrate this morning. You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, and obstruction of justice." The agent grabbed Jasmine's wrist and twisted it behind her back. The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs sounded louder than a gunshot in the stunned courtroom. Jasmine gasped, dropping her briefcase. The symbol of her power lay sideways on the floor, spilling expensive pens and legal pads everywhere. "Turn around," the agent ordered. They marched her past the jury box. As they dragged her toward the main exit, she passed Preston. My brother was sobbing uncontrollably, his face buried in his hands. Jasmine did not even look at him. She stared straight ahead, her face a mask of stone. She had gambled her career, her reputation, and her freedom on the Vance family fortune, and she had lost it all. I watched as the bailiff approached the bench and formally requested her bar card. It was a formality, but the symbolism was heavy. Jasmine Vance, the unstoppable legal shark, was disbarred, disgraced, and detained. The house of cards had not just fallen, it had been incinerated. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than the chaos. The federal agents had taken the men. They had taken Jasmine, but they left one person behind. My mother Beatrice stood alone at the plaintiff's table. She was not in handcuffs. She had been careful. She had never signed a single check or authorized a single illegal transfer. She had let her husband and son do the dirty work while she enjoyed the lifestyle. Technically, she was free. But as she looked at the empty chairs where her family had sat, she realized she was in a prison of her own making. I packed my briefcase, slowly, deliberately ignoring her. I heard the click of her heels on the parquet floor. She was moving fast, desperate. "Sienna," she gasped, grabbing my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Sienna, wait. You cannot leave me here." They took them. They took everyone. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. Her knuckles were white. Her perfect manicure looked grotesque against the cheap fabric of my suit. I gently but firmly peeled her fingers off me one by one. "The FBI is seizing the assets, Mom," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "The house, the cars, the offshore accounts. It is all proceeds of crime. You have nothing." Beatrice's face crumpled. She went from the imperious matriarch to a sobbing victim in the span of a heartbeat. It was Richard, she wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "He forced me, Sienna. I did not know what they were doing. I was scared of him. He made me live that way. You know I love you. You are my daughter. You are the only one I have left." I almost laughed. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was rewriting history in real time, trying to turn herself into a battered wife instead of a willing accomplice. "Stop it," I said sharply. "Stop acting." Beatrice froze. Her eyes darted around the room looking for an audience, but there was no one left to fool. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "Do you remember last night, Mom? In the hallway. You did not know I was recording you." I hit play. Her voice from the night before, tinny and cruel, echoed in the empty courtroom. "You were a strategic acquisition, Sienna. A walking proxy vote. Nothing more. You are a failed investment." Beatrice went pale. She stared at the phone as if it was a weapon. I put the phone away. "You do not love me, Beatrice. You never did. You loved the voting power I represented. Well, now you have lost the vote. You have lost the company. And you have lost the investment. But I am your mother," she whispered, her voice trembling with genuine terror now. "Where will I go? I have no money. I have no home. You have the inheritance, Sienna. You have billions. You cannot let your own mother starve." I looked at her. I saw the woman who had watched my father slap me and did nothing. I saw the woman who had tried to sell my grandfather's dog for $50. "You are a survivor, Mom," I said, turning my back on her. "You are smart. You are manipulative. I am sure you will figure something out. But do not come to me. The Bank of Sienna is closed. Permanently." I walked toward the exit. Behind me, I heard her fall to her knees. She screamed my name, a long, desperate sound that bounced off the high ceilings. I did not slow down. I pushed open the heavy doors and walked out into the bright, blinding sunlight. I was an orphan now, and I had never felt more free. The snow was falling in thick, heavy sheets, covering the Vance estate in a blanket of silence. Inside the library, the fire crackled warmly. Barnaby the golden retriever was sleeping soundly on the rug, his paws twitching in a dream. He was safe. I was safe. It had been 1 week since the trial. 1 week since the FBI dragged my father and brother away in chains. 1 week since I became the sole executor and beneficiary of the $2.4 billion estate. I took a sip of tea and looked at the wall of monitors. The new security system was state-of-the-art. I had installed it myself, replacing the old analog cameras my father had ignored. A movement on screen 3 caught my eye. A figure was standing at the main iron gates. They looked small and fragile against the towering black metal. I zoomed in. It was Beatrice. She was not wearing her mink coat. She was wrapped in a generic wool trench coat that looked 2 sizes too big, likely purchased from a thrift store. Her hair, usually sprayed into a helmet of perfection, was wet and matted against her forehead. She was shivering violently. She reached out a gloved hand and pressed the intercom button. "Sienna," she called out, her voice cracking through the speaker system. "I know you are in there. Please answer me. It is freezing." I did not answer. I just watched. She pressed the button again, longer this time. "Sienna, please." The bank took the penthouse. They took the summer house. I have been sleeping in a shelter. I cannot stay there. It is dangerous. Please just let me in. I do not need the guest suite. I will take the servants' quarters above the garage. I will work for my keep. I can cook. I can manage the household staff. I leaned into the microphone. The irony was suffocating. Just a week ago, her son had offered me a job cleaning toilets in this very house. Now here she was, begging for the same humiliation. "Do you remember what you said to me in the hallway, Mom?" I asked, my voice projecting clearly out to the snowy driveway. "You said I was a failed investment. You said I was a sunk cost." Beatrice looked up at the camera, desperate hope in her eyes. "I was angry, Sienna. I did not mean it. I am your mother. You cannot leave me out here to die." I looked at Barnaby. He had almost died because of her indifference. I looked at the ledger on the desk. It was filled with the evidence of her greed. She had chosen money over family every single day for 30 years. Now the money was gone, and she expected the family to bail her out. "You are not going to die, Beatrice," I said coldly. "You are just going to live like everyone else. You have your health. You have your freedom. That is more than Richard has right now." "Please," she sobbed, falling against the cold metal bars. "Just one night." I reached for the control panel. There was a red button marked lockdown. It would engage the magnetic deadbolts and disable the external keypad. It was the final severance. "You chose the coin, Beatrice." I said, my finger hovering over the button. "Now you have to live with its value." I pressed the button. A loud mechanical clank echoed through the estate as the heavy bolts slammed home. The red light on the gate turned solid. Access denied. Beatrice screamed, but the sound was muffled by the thick glass of the manor. She slumped to the ground, weeping into the snow. I turned off the monitor. The screen went black. I picked up my tea and turned back to the fire. The house was finally clean. The morning air at the private cemetery was crisp and clean. It smelled of pine needles and damp earth. I walked up the winding stone path with Barnaby trotting faithfully beside me. He was old and his hips were stiff, but he held his head high. We were the last two standing, the survivors of a war that had been fought in boardrooms and courtrooms. I stopped in front of a simple gray granite marker. It was unpretentious, just like the man buried beneath it. Theodore Vance, beloved father, honorable man. There were no fresh flowers here. My parents had not visited. My brother had not sent a wreath. They were all currently residents of federal penitentiaries across the state. Richard had received 20 years for racketeering. Preston got 10 for fraud. Jasmine tried to cut a deal, but the judge gave her 5 years for obstruction of justice. And Beatrice. Well, Beatrice was learning how to survive on state welfare in a studio apartment in the Bronx. I looked at the headstone. "It is done." "Grandfather," I said softly, "the stock price has stabilized. I fired the entire board of directors this morning. I promoted the honest managers you told me about in your journals. The company is clean. The rot is gone." Barnaby sat down and rested his chin on his paws, staring at the stone as if he understood. He let out a low, contented sigh. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black velvet box. Inside lay a heavy gold medallion suspended from a red and blue ribbon. The Department of Justice Distinguished Service Award. The director had pinned it on my lapel yesterday in a quiet ceremony in Washington. He said it was for exceptional bravery in dismantling a major organized crime syndicate. He called me a credit to the badge. But I knew who really earned it. I was just the instrument. The courage belonged to the 92-year-old man who realized his own son was a monster and decided to stop him. "You were right, Grandpa. It was never about the money. It was about the integrity." I placed the open box on top of the granite headstone right next to his name. The gold caught the morning sunlight and flashed brilliantly. "Keep this. You earned it." Earned. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the weight of expectation. I did not feel the shadow of my mother's criticism or the threat of my father's anger. I felt light. I looked down at my hands. They were not the hands of a victim. They were the hands of a billionaire CEO and a decorated federal agent. But more importantly, they were my own. "Come on, Barnaby," I said, patting his golden head. "Let us go home." We turned and walked back down the path, leaving the metal shining on the grave. I did not look back at the past. The gates of the cemetery opened wide before me, leading out to a world that finally knew the truth. Justice had been served cold and ruthless, and it tasted like freedom. The 60-inch OLED screen in the boardroom of Oceanic Logistics flickered to life. I sat at the head of the table, the same seat my grandfather had occupied for 40 years. The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the voice of the national news anchor echoing off the glass walls. Breaking news tonight, the anchor announced, his face grave and serious. The downfall of the Vance dynasty continues to shock the financial world. Federal prosecutors have released the full unsealed indictment against Richard and Preston Vance, detailing a decade of systematic embezzlement and money laundering. The screen cut to footage of my father being shoved into a police van. He looked old. The arrogance that had defined his existence had evaporated, leaving behind a frightened man in a wrinkled suit. Next to him, Preston was weeping openly, shielding his face from the very cameras he used to court for attention. But the real story, the anchor continued, shifting his tone to one of admiration, is the woman who brought them down. Sienna Vance, initially painted as a pariah and accused of elder abuse, has been revealed as a high-level federal operative who spent 2 years undercover within her own family to protect the company's assets and its employees. I watched as the graphic on the screen changed. The unflattering photo of me yelling in the rain was gone. Replaced was a professional headshot from my DOJ file. The chyron beneath it read, "The Silent Hero. How the Vance heiress saved a legacy." I scrolled through my phone. The transformation of public opinion was instantaneous and nauseating. The same social media accounts that had told me to rot in prison a week ago were now flooding my inbox with apologies and praise. Hashtags like Justice for Sienna and Girl Boss were trending worldwide. People who had never met me were writing long essays about my bravery and my integrity. They called me a feminist icon. They called me a warrior. I put the phone down on the mahogany table. It was laughable. They did not care about justice. They cared about the winner. When they thought I was poor and defenseless, they wanted to destroy me. Now that I was a billionaire with a badge, they wanted to be me. The news report cut to a clip of a legal analyst. "What makes this case unique is the sheer discipline of Ms. Vance," the analyst said. "She endured months of public humiliation, false accusations, and family betrayal without breaking cover. She allowed the world to hate her to save the evidence. That is a level of dedication we rarely see." I turned off the TV. The room plunged back into silence. They could call me a hero all they wanted. They could write books and make movies about the quiet accountant who took down a crime syndicate. But they would never understand the cost. They did not see the nights I spent crying in my car. They did not feel the sting of my father's slap or the coldness of my mother's rejection. I stood up and walked to the floor, to ceiling window looking out over the city skyline. The world saw a hero. I just saw a survivor. I had cleared my name and saved the company, but the victory was solitary. I was the silent hero, not because I chose to be silent, but because there was no one left to talk to. The phone on my desk buzzed. It was the new board of directors waiting for my instructions. I straightened my blazer and turned away from the view. The news cycle would move on tomorrow, but the work began today. 6 months into his 20-year sentence, Richard Vance sat on the edge of a steel bunk bed in the minimum security wing of the Federal Correctional Institution. The man who used to wear bespoke Italian silk was now scratching at a persistent rash caused by the coarse polyester of his inmate uniform. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and unwashed bodies. But the worst part of his punishment was not the food or the guards. It was his cellmate. Preston sat on the cold concrete floor staring blankly at the toilet. He looked hollow. The golden boy of the Vance dynasty had withered away. His hair was shaved close to his skull, and his eyes were rimmed with red from crying himself to sleep every night. Richard broke the silence, unable to contain his bitterness any longer. "This is your fault, you incompetent fool. If you had just stuck to the shipping logs instead of trying to launder money through those crypto scams, We would be on a yacht in the Mediterranean right now. You got greedy, Preston. You got sloppy. You led the FBI right to our front door. Preston laughed. It was a dry, broken sound that echoed off the cinder blocks. Me, I got greedy. You are the one who gambled away $10 million, Dad. You are the one who borrowed money from the mob. And you are the one who sold Grandpa's dog for $50. Richard stood up, pacing the 3 steps allowed in the cramped cell. That dog was a nuisance. It had nothing to do with the audit. It had everything to do with the audit, Preston shouted, standing up to face him. That was the moment, Dad. That was when she snapped. You slapped her in the rain. You treated her like garbage for 30 years. You made her hate us. She was always weak, Richard spat. She was a quiet little mouse. We gave her a roof over her head. No, Dad. Preston shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. She was not a mouse. She was a trap. And you spent your whole life baiting it. You created her. You made her into the monster that ate us alive. Before Richard could respond, a heavy boot kicked the bars of their cell. A guard stood there looking bored. Inmate Vance, legal mail. He slid a thick yellow envelope through the slot. Preston scrambled to grab it, his hands shaking. Hope flared in his eyes. Maybe it was an appeal. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Mom had found a lawyer. He tore open the seal and pulled out the documents. His face went pale. It was not an appeal. The header read, Petition for Dissolution of Marriage. What is it? Richard asked, leaning closer. Preston slid down the wall, clutching the papers to his chest. It is Jasmine. She is filing for divorce. From her cell in Danbury. Richard snatched the paper. He read Jasmine's statement. She cited irreconcilable differences and fraud. She claimed she was coerced into the scheme by her husband and father-in-law. Even in prison, she was still playing the game. She was cutting Preston loose to improve her chances at a parole hearing in 5 years. She is leaving me, Preston whispered, staring at the ceiling. She is gone. The money is gone. Mom is homeless. And we are going to die in here. Richard looked at his son, and for the first time, he had no answer. He sat back down on the hard bunk. The silence returned heavier than before. They were rotting in a cage of their own making, while the daughter they despised was living in the palace they had built. Sienna had not just won, she had erased them. The rain lashed against the library windows, drumming a rhythm that used to terrify me. In this house, storms meant my father would be drinking. They meant my mother would be cruel. But tonight, the storm was just weather. The fire in the hearth burned steady and bright, casting long shadows across the room that was finally mine. I sat in the high-backed leather chair that had belonged to Theodore Vance. For years, I was not allowed to even step onto this rug. Now, I was the only one left to sit here. Barnaby lay at my feet, his golden fur glowing in the firelight. He let out a soft snore, safe and warm. He was the only living thing in this house that had never lied to me. I opened the black leather journal. The pages were filled with my grandfather's handwriting, documenting the slow heartbreak of realizing his son was a thief. The last few pages, however, were blank. He had left them for me. He knew I would be the one to finish the story. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. The ink flowed black and permanent onto the paper. I did not write about assets or liabilities. I did not write about court dates or prison sentences. I wrote about survival. For 34 years, I thought I was broken because my family did not love me. I thought I was a failure because I could not buy their affection with silence. I let them treat me like an employee in my own life. I let them steal my confidence while they stole the company funds. But I realized something in that courtroom when I saw my mother begging for a life she did not earn. I wrote the words slowly, watching the ink dry. Family is not blood. Blood is just biology. It is a random roll of the genetic dice. Real family are the people who stand beside you when the walls come crashing down. Real family is the grandfather who trusts you with his legacy. Real family is the dog who licks your hand when you are crying. I looked at the words. They were the truest things I had ever written. My parents and my brother shared my DNA, but they were never my family. They were parasites who fed on the host until there was almost nothing left. They used the word family as a weapon to keep me in line. They used it to silence me. I closed the book with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the empty room. It was the sound of a chapter ending. When the blood in your veins becomes poison, you have to stop waiting for a cure. You have to become the antidote yourself. You have to cut off the limb to save the body. I did not destroy my family. I saved myself from them. I stood up and walked to the window. The storm was breaking. Through the clouds, a single star was visible. I was alone in a mansion that could house 50 people. But for the first time in my life, I was not lonely. I was free. I turned off the lamp, leaving the room in darkness save for the fire. The journal sat on the desk, a testimony to the past. But I was not looking at the past anymore. I walked out of the library and closed the door. The end. The story of Sienna Vance offers a profound and uncompromising lesson on the true definition of worth and the necessity of boundaries. We are often conditioned by society to believe that family is an unconditional sanctuary, a bond that must be preserved at all costs. However, Sienna's journey brutally deconstructs this myth, revealing that shared DNA does not grant anyone a license to abuse, exploit, or dehumanize you. The most critical takeaway is that silence is not synonymous with weakness. For years, Sienna's family mistook her quiet demeanor for submission. They believed that because she did not scream, she did not see. They were wrong. Sienna teaches us that the most dangerous person in the room is not the one shouting threats, but the one quietly taking notes. Her victory was not built on luck. It was built on competence. She used the very skills her family mocked: her meticulousness, her accounting expertise, and her patience to dismantle their empire of lies. Furthermore, the story illustrates that accountability is the ultimate form of justice. Richard, Beatrice Preston, and Jasmine lived in a reality where money shielded them from consequences. Sienna did not just strip them of their wealth, she stripped them of their delusions. Her decision to lock the gate on her mother was not an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. It teaches us that you cannot save people who are determined to drag you down with them. To find peace, you must be willing to become the villain in their story, to be the hero in your own. If you enjoyed this saga of justice and revenge, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories where the underdog bites back.